Hello.
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 Hi there.
Hello and welcome to the RadioTimes.com Doctor Who podcast. My name's Hugh.
My name is Morgan.
And we're here this week to talk about Can You Hear Me? No, it's not a surprise Doctor Who appearance for Clem Fandango. It is episode 7 of Doctor Who Series 12. It's a story all about nightmares and kind of about mental health, and it's
about a lot of things.
It's a lot of stuff going on, yeah. There's, some stuff in ancient Syria, like 1320 or 1380, I want to say. 14th century Syria. There's a bit in Sheffield. There's a bit in space. There's a lot. So Morgan wasn't here last week.
No, I have returned, though, and faster than Joe Martin.
Yes. But the reason I bring that up is, so last week we had a bit of a disagreement here in that we basically had slightly differing views on Praxeus, which is episode 6, in that Morgan thought it was great overall, and I liked it but kind of lost interest in it as it went along. And Patrick, who was filled in last week, kind of held your position for you. I feel like we kind of switched spaces on this one.
Flipped a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, because I really liked this episode. I thought it had a great tone, really enjoyed the vibe, loved Ian Gelder playing the villain. And although I thought I could see that there's a couple of things where I'm like, does that make sense? It kind of just pulled me through because I enjoyed it so much. Whereas you're kind of the other way around. I'm
taking the stance you were taking on Praxeus, yeah. I did like this episode, don't get me wrong, but I quite liked it. I thought it had the potential to be a lot better. I agree with you about it had great atmosphere, I thought great tone, particularly in the early going. But then it lost me a little bit. I think I felt like a lot of the atmosphere got lost by way of the technobabble.
Yeah.
A little later on, I felt like the climax was quite confused. And there was an awful lot going on. You've got nightmares, monsters invading your nightmares. You've got dueling gods. It sort of touches on mental health. You've got an animated sequence that was great.
I really like that,
but it sort of comes out of nowhere.
It's very unlike Doctor Who, that I thought.
Yeah,
the animated sequence. It felt more like something you'd have in a movie.
But for me, all these disparate elements didn't quite gel.
Yeah, so we should say sort of the story's quite complicated, as we said. It kind of starts with, we have a pre-credits sequence for the first time in a while.
Love the cold open.
Yes, and when we spoke to Chris Chibnall before the series began, he said that there were a couple of episodes, or at least one episode, where they hadn't planned to have one, but then decided it would work quite well. I reckon it was this one.
Yeah.
Because it felt like that could have been a scene that came afterwards, and they just decided because there's this big scary bit.
And it feels sort of structurally quite like the way, so I was saying an old school Doctor Who episode, but the way like a Russell T Davies episode might have opened.
Totally. Although I did think, and maybe we'll touch on this later, there's a bit later on where you see Zellin, Ian Gelder's character, menacing a young girl who's like a little kid in bed whose mum says the bogeyman's not real, and then he appears and said, "That's not true.
That's not true."
And I was thinking in a Stephen Moffat episode, that would have been like the beginning. And that would have been, you would have maybe followed that girl as she got older.
Yeah, flash forward 30 years, meet her as a grown up. She's still scared of the boogeyman.
Yeah. But, they did it this way. So we sort of kick off in Aleppo, which is, quite, Doctor Who's particularly globe-trotting this year. It's not particularly galaxy-trotting. We've sort of written about it.
Quite earthbound.
Every episode so far has been mostly set on Earth.
Yeah.
A lot of it in present-day Earth as well, not all of it. Don't know if that's intentional. You can read about that on RadioTimes.com if you're so inclined.
And this episode does touch on the Doctor's affection for humanity, which is long established.
Yeah, so it kind of makes sense. But yeah, basically, so we're in this hospital in Aleppo. We kind of learn a little bit about how at that time they had quite a good sort of understanding of mental health in that particular kind of sphere of medicine in that area of the world. And then these monsters attack this hospital. And then we kind of jump to present day. The Doctor's dropping people off. It's unclear whether she's just a bit like bored or whether she's still feeling a bit like traumatized by previous episodes. She's sort of listless.
She is quite restless. But I think if the idea was she was still traumatized from the events of Fugitive of the Jadoon, that wasn't telegraphed clearly enough.
No,
it just felt like it was being good old restless Doctor. Something like Matt Smith's Doctor might have done that too.
Yeah, like talking to herself and all that stuff.
But one of the things I did like about this episode, dropping off the companions, and then later on as it digs into their worst fears and their nightmares.
Yeah.
I would say these companions, much as I have enjoyed the characters and the performances, they haven't had much of an emotional arc.
No.
Really, from when they debuted, they haven't changed a lot as characters. And, possibly it's too little too late, but this episode did feel at least like a concerted attempt to grow those characters a little.
Totally, and it sort of was picking up threads that started in Spyfall. So in this episode, Ryan sort of sees his friend Thibaut, who we met in Spyfall. They were playing basketball, and he was sort of like, "Oh, why aren't you around anymore?" And in this one, that's gotten a bit more serious. Thibaut kind of blames Ryan for not being around when he needed him. He's been having some troubles, and then then it kind of feeds into Ryan's question at the end of the episode of like, at what point am I going to stop leaving my friends behind? And we see that Ryan's biggest fear is like...
Is Orphan 55.
I mean, who can blame him? No, we see Ryan's biggest fear is like partly leaving people behind and them like going on without him, but also the dregs. But then they kind of use that as a kind of representation of like becoming something bad and like the future of the world,
which makes sense given how Orphan 55 played out.
Yeah.
Again, though, like that, I really liked what they were trying to do with that storyline. I particularly like how it played out at the end. That even though everything was resolved in terms of what Zellin was up to, it wasn't. There was still like real world repercussions for Thibaut, and we saw him kind of learn that it was okay to speak out about how he was feeling. There wasn't a depression monster, and there wasn't a quick and easy sci-fi explanation for his struggles.
Definitely. And also we sort of catch up with... We saw Yaz and her sister chatting a bit at the beginning of the series, and she's back. The parents aren't. They're off in Whitby, appearing in Dracula, maybe. And Graham basically meets up with some bus driver mates, but also we kind of... In his worst fear bit, it picks up on, his cancer treatment and his checkups and stuff. We should talk about Yaz a bit more, though, I think. I mean, there's a lot to talk about in this episode, like I say. We will talk about the villains and the space stuff. But one of the interesting things is we kind of get a bit of an arc for Yaz here. Now, there'd been sort of a few hints that there was a bit more for her this year and that there was some big story coming. And I think that's what this is sort of aiming at. And basically, it suggested that, Yaz was bullied at school, which we've heard before. You'd be forgiven for forgetting. It was in the last series, and I kind of only half remember it, but she was bullied by some girl at school. And then at the end of the episode, we see a flashback. Her worst fear is like her lowest ebb. She ran away from home, and this policewoman kind of gives her a bit of a pep talk and gets her to come back. And then at the end of the episode, she like goes and thanks this policewoman,
which was a really sweet scene. I
really
thought
sweet,
really nicely played,
quite emotional.
Yeah,
I do sort of agree with you though. Like I thought it worked, but I was sort of like, I wish this had been set up more.
This is it. Like for all like I really liked what this episode was trying to do with the Yaz storyline, with the Ryan storyline, even the Graham storyline. But I felt like it just wasn't. It didn't hit home quite as. It wasn't as impactful as it could have been because the setup wasn't there. It kind of came out of nowhere. Like I say, maybe it was too little, too late. So
and it's not necessarily this episode's fault in terms of like when we're talking setup, we kind of mean like in episode 3, like Yaz saying something about something,
or series 11.
Yeah.
As much as I enjoyed the relationship between Ryan and Thibaut, I think like if Thibaut had been like, I'll be honest, he was in Spyfall very briefly. Well, the first time I watched this new episode, I completely forgot he had even been in the show before, and I think a lot of people will. But if that character had been established, throughout this series or even in the previous series, I feel like this would have been a lot more impactful. And we've seen quite a few times, the companion. Partner relationship. So obviously like Rose and Mickey, Clara and Danny Pink, and sort of how the partner feels about being left back on Earth. We've never really seen like a companion, the best friend, and how that dynamic might
And that's
play
interesting
out.
Because the companions tend to be young people, and like young people have these close relationships with friends that like maybe older people wouldn't necessarily.
It's that your friends are your family when you're young, right?
Totally, and that would make sense for Ryan, who doesn't really have that much of a family anymore. Like he has Graham, obviously, but Grace, who appears in this episode, by the way, Sharon D. Clarke, back in action. She's back, but now she's gone. He's got Graham, and like so it makes sense that he kind of would turn to his friends. I think there's an implication that Thibaut was a co-worker of his at some point as well.
So I felt like both the Ryan and Yaz storylines, they sort of played out as well as they possibly could have done in this episode.
Within the episode,
but they just would have. They would have worked so much better if the setup had been there.
Yeah. That said, I do know I've seen some fans online talking about Yaz's bullying thing and how they think that might come back. So it might be something that some people are more aware of than we are and have more of a connection to. So if that's the case, then maybe it'll work better for them. We should talk about something we haven't talked about yet, which is Ian Gelder as Zellin. So Zellin's the big baddie in this episode. I do enjoy when they have a proper villain.
Yeah.
Don't you? Not just like a monster, not like what's going on here, like a proper sort of thespian theatrical villain.
Yeah, and I think it brings out the best in Jodie's Doctor as well when she has like someone to face off against.
She's always much better when she's facing off against people.
Yeah, whether it's Ian Gelder in this episode or Sacha Dhawan's Master.
Or even King James in the last series.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that was one of the first episodes where it was like, we saw a slightly different side to her, where she had like not necessarily a human villain, but a humanoid villain to face off against someone that she could spar with.
Exactly, and he's quite good fun. Like we've talked before about Ian Gelder has been in Torchwood, obviously, and he voiced the Remnants, which are the sort of rag things that were in the Ghost Monument in 2018, and they kind of do the Timeless Child thing. They kind of set that up. Chris Chibnall has explicitly said that Zellin isn't connected to the Remnants.
Which you'd be forgiven for thinking, given that the Timeless Child thing is very much, back in
Totally, yeah.
back in the series.
It's just kind of a coincidence. Like they had him do that, and got him back to this because they like him so much. And this isn't us sort of saying, oh, maybe it could be, maybe it couldn't. Like clearly, Zellin isn't that connected to any of that in the story. He is connected to some other parts of Doctor Who past, though.
He is, yes. So Zellin and Rakaya, who are these immortals, they are. It's sort of implied in the episode that they are different to, but linked to. Supernatural beings that we've seen in Doctor Who's past in the classic series. So he makes reference to the Celestial Toymaker. He says, I think the Toymaker would have approved. Yeah. And the Celestial Toymaker was this all-powerful being who originally appeared in the 1960s in a William Hartnell story of the same name. Zellin also says the Eternals have their games, the Guardians have their power struggles, which is darting all around the continuity there. So you've got the Eternals, who they appeared in Doctor Who in the 80s, first in the story Enlightenment, which is a Peter Davison story, and then power struggles of the Guardians. That's the White Guardian and the Black Guardian, who first appeared in Doctor Who's Key to Time season with Tom Baker, and then they reappeared again in the 1980s. So it's sort of implied that I don't think they're intended to be Guardians or along the lines of the Toymaker, but sort of tangentially linked, possibly the same kind of thing.
Definitely. And it's kind of, I quite enjoyed, like, I'm not as familiar with all this stuff, as in like this particular strand of Classic Who, but I like when the series kind of mines the less covered stuff.
Yeah.
Like, but we, Cybermen, Daleks and stuff, we're kind of pretty familiar with how that all plays out. It's nice to kind of, it's always like a deep cut. Like the Black Guardian's pretty well known, but like, it's nice to kind of, even if you're not making the point of the story, it's nice to include. That's kind of what I missed in Praxis with the thing where it could have been Autons and it wasn't. Like, I feel like I like that they mention the Autons, but I feel like even if people wouldn't really care if it was the Autons or not, casual viewers, I thought it would have been nicer if it was because of that.
Well, that's it with this, is that for casual viewers, they don't know who the Black and White Guardian and the Celestial Toymaker are.
Yeah, it just sounds like cool backstory.
Exactly, but equally, it doesn't impact the story if they don't know. It's just a cool little nod for fans.
Totally.
And I thought that worked really well on that level.
We find out later on, Zellin, who has, we should mention, his very creepy finger trick.
Oh yeah, fingers in ears.
Which is sort of odd. I'm sort of like, it is creepy.
Yeah.
But it's not like something I've thought about that much. Do you know what I mean? It's not one of those, the cracks in the wall are speaking to you, or what's in the shadows, oh my God, did that statue move? It's kind of, that would be a bit gross, but it's not a fear I've had.
It's not like a deep-rooted, like, psychological human fear
of having a little finger
that we all share, like a wet willy. It's not, do you know what I mean? It's basically what he's doing is like, it's sci-fi wet willy.
I do like that they go black, though. I thought that was quite grim.
Yeah.
Like, that's sort of, it's a kind of violation. Which kind of works, but it's sort of odd. But he does all his finger thing, and it turns out he's got quite a complicated plan. And the reason that he projects these visions to Graham is so that the Doctor will come to this space platform and free his sort of partner in crime,
who's trapped in an orb that's between two planets that are crashing into each other.
Yeah, so a bit Satan.
We somehow got here from Aleppo, and I wasn't entirely sure how we got there.
I'm not quite sure how Aleppo factors in, apart from the fact that it ties in with the mental health thing.
Yeah,
and that it's here's this person being haunted by nightmares. I don't get why specifically there. Like, there wasn't, like, I guess he's been around for ages doing different stuff, and maybe he can travel through time, Zellin we're talking about here, but I'm not really sure. It's, when you're watching it, I didn't think that much about it, but the more I think about it afterwards, I just don't quite follow why we're there.
No, why we're there, why that character plays into it so much.
Yeah.
It's this thing with this episode. I felt like it tried to bite off more than it could chew. And when you're dealing with something with mental health, you want to make sure that you give it the screen time it deserves. And I felt like it didn't quite do, for the most part, it didn't do justice to all of its ingredients, all of which were quite interesting ingredients that could have propped up an episode of their own.
I do think I kind of found it quite interesting that it isn't that the monster is depression, because that's something they could have gone down. They've kind of done stuff like this in the past. I mean, like in Vincent and the Doctor, like he sort of he empathizes with the monster, and that's kind of that's another episode all about depression, Doctor Who, which is done sort of differently.
It is different, but at the end, it does also. It doesn't make the mistake of going, depression is a sci-fi monster, and if you kill the monster, you're fine.
Yeah, I think they did that well. I think the trouble is, though, they almost. Just to say again, I did really like this episode. I do think the mental health stuff, because they don't want to present it as the sci-fi thing. The sci-fi thing of the episode is all about nightmares and these gods. It kind of makes it difficult if they don't quite state the theme.
Yeah.
If that makes sense?
Yeah.
Like, it's sort of connected, but it's not quite connected, and they don't explicitly make the connection. So it feels kind of extra. Like, we've had nightmare stories before, The Dream Lord and Night Terrors, which haven't been about mental health. So
Yeah.
I know it's to do with people's negative thoughts and stuff, but I feel like they didn't quite thread the needle on the connection between those two things. But again, it was one of those things where it just pulled me through because I just enjoyed the performances and I enjoyed the story. I've enjoyed this series, actually, how they use the TARDIS a lot more mid-story. They don't just land somewhere, do stuff, and then leave at the end.
Yeah,
There's been a lot more travelling in it.
Well, we're saying about this series being earthbound, and it has been, but also, as you say, there's very few stories where they just land somewhere and explore and find an adventure.
Totally, and I do quite like that. Like, that makes it, I don't know, it makes it feel a bit more... I don't know, a bit more broken up in a fun way. It's like how we talked about the companions in Never Enough to See last series. I think the fact that they're constantly splitting them up this series, I mean, it kind of is slightly damning in that Jodie's better without them. But I do think it gives the stories more scope.
Yeah, that was interesting, actually, how, as with Fugitive of the Jadoon, and Praxis, the Doctor is cut off entirely from her companions, sort of has an adventure on her own.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was interesting. On the point of the TARDIS, though, we often hear a lot about the TARDIS being impregnable.
Yeah, clearly not.
No, was it the assembled hordes of Genghis Khan couldn't get through those doors, and believe me, they've tried. Yeah. And it's like, we've already seen the Kasavin and now Zellin.
I guess Zellin is supposed to be a god, so you can kind of a god, so you can kind of get away.
Yeah.
I don't really understand why he was in the TARDIS either. He was just sort of hanging out, looking creepy.
I think he just sort of, reared his head to get the Doctor's attention, which we were sort of trying to work out why he sent those nightmares into Graham's brain.
I think it's specifically, he says, one of the things we talked about is it's not entirely clear what the sort of whole thing is with freeing this other person and then how they end up imprisoned again. The way I understood it is that someone else imprisons his partner, whose name I forget, and he basically has to get somebody to free her. It can't be him, has to be someone physical. And I guess the Doctor is one of the people who is clever enough to work out the technology and how to get the person out.
Celestial Toymaker has probably given him a nod and been like, the Doctor
listen,
can do it.
This guy / gal are perfect for your needs.
Yeah.
So then the Doctor comes. I do quite like that she's sort of, I've solved it. And I was like, I know you haven't, because it's very early in the episode.
Yeah. No, it was a good twist. I did really like that twist.
It was a fun twist. And then the thing is, though, I liked Zellin a lot when he was on his own. I feel like as a duo, I really like the animated sequence. I think they kind of lose a bit of their menace because they just sort of go down to a street and sort of chat a bit and then start sort of sucking in dreams.
And Claire Hope Ashite, who I think is a brilliant actress, actually. She's been fantastic in other things. I don't feel like she was given a great deal to do here.
It's all very like, we shall take this world.
Yeah. It's very kind of generic villain 101. And so I don't feel like the show made the most of her necessarily. So when she was paired with Zellin, it then felt a little flat to me.
And Zellin was having fun with it. That was the thing. Like, Ian Gelder was allowed to be a bit like, ho.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you want.
A little bit panto in like just the right way.
Exactly, yeah. And then at the end of the episode, they sort of get imprisoned together. And I think you said to me afterwards, you didn't work out how it happened.
Well, that whole final sequence I thought was really, I was talking about the episode getting a bit lost in its technobabble and that loses a lot of the atmosphere getting lost. And that whole final sequence where the Doctor, I don't know, maybe I just wasn't paying attention, but the Doctor suddenly has an orb and then they're in the orb and then the monster's in the orb. And I was like, what? Yeah, it all felt very rushed and anticlimactic to me.
So I know I feel like it's maybe says something that I've been explaining so many points of this episode to myself as much as anyone. But the way I saw it in that is that for some reason, Zellin manifested physically the nightmares of the girl from Syria.
Which previously weren't physical, as was established, because they couldn't be detected by
Well, no, they were. See, this is the problem. They were.
Right.
It's just they didn't exist. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
he'd made them, but they
Right.
didn't technically exist because
Right.
they were imaginary. But they could obviously physically, because they took people.
Yeah.
Basically, that one time he did that. All the other times he just took memories and or took nightmares and used them to sort of like
feed his partner in crime.
his goth girlfriend. And this time he decided it would be more efficient somehow to use these monsters. So they're still hanging around, or at least make one of them.
Fine.
It's the only time he does it. And then when they're on this platform, that orb thing was there the whole time. And it's kind of like, I took it as kind of like, it represents the prison. And so it's kind of like a key almost. So when the Doctor threw it to them, they were put in there with the monster from the girl from Aleppo, which she had literally conquered her fear.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's two options here. One is I'm being dumb, and the other is that this episode is slightly too convoluted for its own good.
I think the fact that he only manifests physically a monster this one time, it's not really explained why he doesn't do that other times. If he'd done it somewhere else as well, I just thought the God complex is kind of like nightmares as well, or worst fears.
Yeah, this is a little bit of a greatest hits episode of Doctor Who. You've got a little bit of Vincent the Doctor with the depression monster.
Yeah.
You've got a little bit of God complex. Yeah, it definitely draws on like previous episodes.
Definitely. I mean, there's no new ideas. I think it's all just...
Yeah, no.
It's
that's
all
not
it's all,
criticism.
It's all takes on things. I think this one does do a lot of new stuff.
We should talk about the Doctor's greatest fear as well.
Yes, we should. This is something I liked a lot because one of the problems I had with Praxeus is that it doesn't really move the story along. It felt a bit of like a filler episode, and you need those. But this was also not a filler episode, but it was a self-contained story.
It wasn't a significant arc episode.
No, but they moved it along a little bit. So basically, the Doctor's greatest fear isn't the crack in time anymore, like it was in the God complex.
Oh yeah,
moved on. Basically, the Doctor's nightmare is she's on Gallifrey, we assume, and she's in front of this big structure and looking at this young girl. And basically, we saw this same girl back in Spyfall Part 2. With the implication that she's part of the Timeless Child mystery. Because when the Master's telling the Doctor, oh yeah, the lie of the Timeless Child, Gallifrey's big secret, she suddenly has this vision. He's like, yeah, you can remember now, can't you? And yeah, so basically the thing is, in episode 2, in Spyfall Part 2, it's very quick. So if you are sort of a nerdy internet person, you would have like slowed it down and had a look
grabbed
at
it. And
yeah. This is possibly for a lot of people the first time you see it properly, and you see it in a lot more depth. Also, it's the first time we see it after they introduced the Joe Martin Doctor, and a lot of people have theorized from when the Timeless Child's first mentioned in 2018 that the Doctor is in some way the Timeless Child. Since the Joe Martin Doctor turned up, people have thought maybe this Doctor's the Timeless Child.
The Doctor is the Timeless Child, but probably not the one you're expecting.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, to be honest, this will maybe, I've used this expression once today already, thread the needle a little for some people on that, in that we've seen this new Doctor, who's played by a black actor, Joe Martin, and this young girl who's somehow connected to the Timeless Child, who's also played by a black actor, and seems to wear a similar sort of colour scheme. Yeah. I'm not sure. We see it very blurrily.
Very briefly.
Yeah. But I like that you hear a bit of the Master's chat, but there's no conversation about it. It just sort of dips us into the thing to say, oh yeah, remember the arc. There's the arc, and then
we've talked about. I mean, it doesn't touch on the lone Cyberman, although presumably next week we'll get some answers on that. But we've talked about this series is suddenly quite arc heavy, so it would make sense when you've got 3 story arcs for at least 2 of them to be connected, for the Timeless Child and the new Doctor to be linked.
I think that's fair, and also it seemed that presumably this Cyberman thing will tie in a bit to that. We should actually say, we're kind of in the home stretch for this year's Doctor Who. We got 3 episodes left after this one. We have next week is The Haunting of Villa Diodati.
Nice, well remembered.
Which is all about Mary Shelley and Byron and the creation of Frankenstein, the book Frankenstein, not to be confused with Frankenstein's monster.
No, of course.
Or the creature, as he's known in the book. But yeah, basically, the rumour for a long time has been that the Cybermen are involved in that in some way, and that inspires it. We now know, they've released some new details, that the penultimate episode of the series, episode 9, is called Ascension of the Cybermen. It's set at the end of the last great cyber war, and it's, the last Cybermen versus the last humans. So possibly... There's a big group of Cybermen in this one, though, we've heard. So possibly the lone Cyberman turns up in some way in the next episode, and then that kind of feeds into it.
Well, it would make sense with the whole, if it is the idea is that a Cyberman inspires Frankenstein, that it's this kind of like one lone figure, like Frankenstein's monster, like the creature.
Kind of maybe sympathetic in some way.
Yeah. Right, like a little bit broken down, as we've seen. We've seen that image in the trailer of what appears to be a damaged, rusty old Cyberman. So maybe that is the one that inspires Frankenstein's monster in some way. And then, as we get to Ascension of the Cybermen, Jack talked about the lone Cyberman giving him what he wants, which then will somehow resurrect the cyber race to their previous glory.
So they come into it, and then we know in the finale it's called the Timeless Children. See what they did there? So that's, we're going to get some answers, is what Chris Chibnall said.
Although I did see someone suggest that the Timeless Child's name is Ren, and it's actually the Timeless Child, Ren. But probably not.
Ren.
Yeah.
I like that. So the reason we bring this up is just because kind of at this point everything kind of points towards these big arcs. Like we don't know what's going to happen afterwards. We know there's another festive special and another series planned. We don't know what's happening in any of those. We don't know, we know Jodie Whittaker says she's sticking around. We don't know about all the companions.
We don't know. And of course in this episode, Ryan is thinking, is this my life? Should I go home?
Totally. So, and in real life, Tosin Cole has been cast in a big new US TV show. So could be connected. We don't know though.
Who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, potentially, one or a couple or all of the companions could leave by the end of the series.
Yeah, and not voluntarily. Some of them could die. So there's a lot to deal with. And, I think in that sense, Can You Hear Me worked in that it was this self-contained story, but there was. It wasn't like, oh look, the Doctor's come back, this new Doctor to say hello, but they did acknowledge the timeless child thing, and they did some character work with the companions where like Graham's sort of worrying about his illness, and Yaz is she's sort of more upbeat, but she's still thinking about the future,
reflective, and
and Ryan's like genuinely, clearly thinking of coming home because the Earth can't get along without him. So I feel like it kind of moves things along, while still not. Because the thing is, when I'm complaining about stuff not being very archy or whatever, I don't literally mean, oh, let's talk about the Timeless Child every single week. It's more like you
the emotional arc.
You like to see a sort of a hand to hand from episode to episode, if that makes sense. Like you'd like to see them pushing
a progression.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, and you're right in that this episode, as much as I enjoyed Praxius, what this episode had over that was that it pushed the characters forward, if not the story.
Definitely. And that seems like a pretty good note to sum up on Can You Hear Me? There's a lot to like, a few sort of odd moments. There was a bit where Jodie Whittaker said, imagine the secrets this place can yield, which is very,
that was slightly odd. The Doctor's final conversation with Graham, we felt landed slightly oddly as well.
Especially with the kind of it's time to talk theme, then he did talk about something he was worried about and the Doctor didn't seem very interested.
Yeah. I think you were saying it was a scene that might have played better with early Peter Capaldi.
Yes, because this Doctor does seem quite social.
And compassionate. And
But anyway, we could nitpick all day, but there's a lot to like, a few things. And basically, as ever, a lot of it's down to personal taste, the kind of Doctor Who that you enjoy. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of lively discussion in the comments and online. Please do check out our other coverage, our written coverage of it. We'll have some questions. We'll pull out a few of the things in the episode, and we should have a review. And we'll be obviously for the next few weeks we're going to be talking a lot about Doctor Who on RadioTimes.com because we're going to find out who the Timeless Child is.
Hopefully, Cybermen
is, and Captain Jack's chorus line. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Spoilers! Oh no, just to pretend you didn't hear that. But for now, I'm just going to thank you for listening and let us know what you thought below. And thank you very much.